Hi everyone. Thanks for joining in. Want to welcome Laura Elizabeth Woollett, who's joining us tonight. Thanks so much for joining us, Laura. Laura is the author of a short story collection, The Love of a Bad Man, and two novels, Beautiful Revolutionary and The Newcomer. The Love of a Bad Man was shortlisted for the Victorian Premier's Literary Award for Fiction and the Ned Kelly Award for Best First Fiction. Beautiful Revolutionary was shortlisted for the 2019 Prime Minister's Literary Award for Fiction, the Australian Literature Society Gold Medal, and the Kathleen Mitchell Award. Laura is the City of Melbourne's 2020 Board Garrett Writer in Residence and is the 2020 to 2022 Martin Bequest Scholar for Prose. And as I said, her latest novel is The Newcomer. If it lets me show The Newcomer. And thanks to Scribe Publishers. If anyone asks a question for Laura during the Facebook Live, they'll have a chance to win a copy of The Newcomer. So thanks so much, Laura, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about The Newcomer.
Yeah, so The Newcomer is my third book. It's my first attempt at a crime novel, but it's quite an unconventional crime novel. It focuses on the perspectives of the murder victim and her mother, Judy. The murder victim's name is Paulina. She is a 29-year-old woman who moves to an island called Fairfolk off the coast of Australia to kind of get away from the chaos of her late 20s and have a fresh start. And it follows her for 2 years of her life, and it follows her mother for about 5 years after her death, and all the investigation and all that stuff kind of unfolds from her mother's perspective.
And I think, am I right in saying, did I read that it is based on partly a true story?
It's loosely based on the murder of Janelle Patton on Norfolk Island, and Fairfolk closely resembles Norfolk Island, but has quite a few differences as well. And that case happened in 2002.
Okay. And do you have some connection to Norfolk Island?
I don't have a personal connection to Norfolk Island, but I was able to visit for research, and also during the writing process, I had 3 weeks on the island where I was sort of immersed in the environment.
Yeah. And what gave you the first idea for The Newcomer?
Well, I actually had a different novel in mind and got funding to visit Norfolk Island, kind of because I had an indirect relationship to the novel that I was planning. And I got there and I was just so intrigued by Norfolk Island as a setting that I wanted to write about it more directly, even through a fictional lens. But I also, I am like an avid consumer of true crime stories, and I knew about the Patton case and visited some significant locations while I was on the island the first time in 2018. But actually, the day after I returned from Norfolk Island, the murder of Eurydice Dixon, Melbourne woman, was in the news, and a lot of the sort of conversations that were going around that, and the victim blaming and so forth, really got me to a point where I wanted to write a victim-focused crime novel.
So, did you know about the case before you visited Norfolk Island? Is that right?
Yeah, actually, just like planning to visit Norfolk Island, I picked up a book called Norfolk Island of Secrets, which is the true crime book about the Patton case. And so I read that just to get a feel for the place that I was visiting, and read a bit up about it, and listened to Case File True Crime podcast episode about it.
Mm. And we've got a few people watching already, which is great. So just
Great.
reminding the people watching that if they have any questions, please type them in comments and they'll have a chance to win a copy of the Newcomer. Tony says, how did it go doing the research on Norfolk Island? I know the locals get lots of authors stay there, and I believe it's a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful place. It's actually an amazing place to get writing done because their internet is very limited, so there's less distractions. But, you know, I went there without the plan of writing about this case, so I was really just soaking up the environment when I was there. I didn't actually have a driver's license when I was there, and even though it's a tiny island, it's 5 kilometers by 8 kilometers. People don't typically walk around. You know, everyone tends to drive, but I was walking everywhere and meeting a lot of people just by walking. People would offer me lifts and stuff, so it was a good way to get to know the place. And just the little conversations that you have encountering people, you get a feel for island life and, you know, the little things that are going on at the time. And things kind of made their way into the book just by me being in that environment.
And what did the locals there think about you writing a book set there?
I didn't tell everyone I met, you know, like I was casually meeting people, didn't want to get into the details too much. But yeah, I think, you know, like I did try to fictionalize the case rather than going deep into the research and potentially digging up old wounds and old feelings about the case. So yeah, I didn't want to cause drama with the locals by, you know, interrogating anyone or anything like that. I did tell a few people, you know, I'm working on a crime novel inspired by the place, and a few people who I, you know, built closer relationships with knew about it. But yeah, overall, you know, I've had a little bit of feedback from Islanders. A couple of people have read the book. No negative feedback so far.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
So you've had some people from Norfolk Island read it and come back giving you responses, what they felt like, and
yeah. Just saying, you know, I captured aspects of the place quite well, I guess. Yeah.
And could you tell me a little bit about how hard or easy it was for you to first get published?
Yeah, well, I guess it's a long process, you know, like, and sometimes you think you're ready and you're actually not. So I think I had a few false starts and I was sending out things which weren't necessarily my best work. But I was actually lucky in meeting my editor. We've worked on 3 books together. I first met her when I was doing a reading as part of Melbourne Writers Festival. They had a program in 2015, which was 30 under 30, where they were kind of showcasing 30 writers under 30. And I met my editor at that reading, and kind of, you know, she ended up asking to see some work, and I sent her my short story collection, which was already finished at the time, and the first chapters of my novel. So I guess that was my in to being published. I had published a few short stories and stuff around the place. When I was younger, in my early 20s, I was a fiction editor for VoiceWorks magazine, which is a magazine for writers under 25. So that really helped my writing because I was reading submissions and seeing things that were coming through and sort of getting a feel for what made a good story.
And had you always thought you'd be a writer?
Pretty much from the age of about 16, I got really interested in the idea of being a writer, and my parents were pretty supportive. You know, they told me you're not going to earn much money, but you know, they didn't say, you know, go be an accountant or go be something else. Very much they let me pursue that. And
did you go on and study at university for like some literature study? And
yeah, I did a Bachelor of Arts at Melbourne Uni and graduated in 2012. yeah, and majored in creative writing. So doing that degree definitely got me
Yeah,
in
got you
the
in the,
zone.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Sarah Joy, she's wondering what you like reading, and I'm wondering if maybe there's something you want to recommend to us that you might have read lately.
Yeah, I actually, I think like a lot of people in lockdown at the moment, I'm not necessarily reading as well as I used to, like I've got a bit of the
Mm,
brain fog. But one book I reread recently was Looking for Ella Brandy. It's a classic that just
mm,
was a really good, easy read and really fun to revisit. It's a book I loved in my teens, so coming back to that was really nice. I also finished a book last night called In Moonland by Miles Allenson, who he's another author from my publishing house, Scribe,
mm,
and his book is a very interesting multi-generational story that begins with a man, looking into his father's life before he was born, but ends up delving back into the past. And the father is a member of the Rajneeshi cult in India in the 70s, and
mm.
then it ends up also following this man's daughter when she's a bit older. So it's a really great book because it's I think 3 different generations, and he packs it into about 250 pages. It's
Mm.
just a really captivating story.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting read. Mm. And um, I'm just wondering what you hope that readers will love about your books.
Hopefully the characters.
Mm,
I've had some divided reactions to the characters, to be honest. Like a lot of people have told me they're, unlikable, especially Paulina, who's the
mm,
murder victim. But yeah, I'm very much a character focused author. I like delving into, complex people and really trying to figure out what makes people tick. And yeah, so I hope people, will, even if they don't necessarily like the characters, will remember them
yeah.
long after the book is finished and they'll stick in their minds.
Mm,
Um, and it is quite a dark book, but like I was hoping also that there's moments of lightness in it as well, and moments of humor, and
mm,
moments where the relationships and the love between the characters shines through as
mm,
well.
mm. And do you plot your book before you start? And do you know the ending when you start?
Generally, yeah, like I think I always have a pretty good idea of where things are going and how things are going to end. And I guess there's always like a few points that I want to get to throughout the
Mm,
story that I have mapped out, but also surprises come up along the way
mm,
as well. And sometimes you end up going down a route that you didn't expect to go down. But yeah, I guess when I'm writing, I always have a few things in mind that I want to get to, and I don't necessarily know how I'm going to get there. So figuring that out is the hardest part, I think.
yeah, yeah. And Marja, she wonders what kind of books have made the biggest impression of you when you were growing up?
When I was growing up,
Mm,
that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I guess like I grew up reading young adult fiction. I wasn't necessarily reading complex, adult fiction when
mm,
I was younger, and I even had years where I didn't read that much. But uh, a young adult author I read a lot was Margaret Clark. I think she's based around Geelong, Torquay, somewhere around there,
okay.
and
Mm,
she wrote a lot about teenagers, and a lot of them were surfers and stuff. So I was
mm,
living in Perth, and I just thought, okay, this is cool. And a lot of those were written in the 90s. But one book, I think the first book of adult fiction that really impacted me, which I read when I was like 15, 16, was The Beach by Alex Garland. And that's the story of a backpacker who becomes involved with this secret community of backpackers living on
okay.
a secret island in Thailand, and it starts as this sort of idyllic commune and becomes a lot darker. So I think that definitely triggered some of my interest in islands and also like you know, communities, cults.
And Tony wonders if you can tell us a little bit more about your other novel.
Yeah, my novel Beautiful Revolutionary, it was published in 2018. That's historical fiction. It's based on People's Temple, which is a socialist religious community, which in the 1970s, the community ended up, most of its members dying in a mass murder suicide in Jonestown, Guyana. And the novel begins in 1968 and follows the characters for 10 years. The main characters are a couple who are in their 20s at the beginning of the book, Evelyn and Lenny Linden. And they're newlyweds, but they end up sort of going their separate ways, but both remaining within the cult. And Evelyn ends up being quite a high up member in the cult and also having a long-term relationship with the leader, Jim Jones.
No, that sounds interesting as well. And are you working on something new at the moment?
Yeah, I'm currently working on a collection of short stories, but they're interconnected, and I'm still figuring out all the connections between the different stories. But you know, in the beginning, when I began working on this, it was actually just a bit as procrastination because I had another novel in mind, but I wasn't ready to write it yet. So I ended up working on short stories just as a way of kind of working on something, like procrastinating in a productive way. But it's ended up snowballing into something bigger. And I guess loosely the theme of the short stories, they're mostly based around girls and women in Perth in WA, where I grew up. And yeah, a lot of the characters are sort of inhabiting the same universe and come into contact with each other. But 6 of the stories follow the same character, a young woman called Luna.
And how far along are you with that?
I would say maybe like a third into it, maybe halfway through. Yeah, I recently finished a story which ended up being a lot longer than I planned it being. Yeah.
So how, for those who don't know, like a short story, what determines the length to be called a short story?
I mean, the definition is kind of loose, but usually my short stories are about 2,000, 3,000 words long. That's just like I'm most comfortable with. But this one I finished recently ended up being 15,000 words, so it's significantly bigger.
Yeah. And that's quite interesting that they're all intertwined as well.
Yeah.
And could you tell us, for you, what do you think makes a good story?
Definitely character for me. Like, I think if I don't have a character that presents something interesting and complex to me, even if the plot is interesting, I get a bit bored. Yeah, I think people who surprise you, people who characters who you like don't necessarily see yourself in them, but you see something human and recognizable in them. And I really, I want to have a character who it's not just things happening to them, like they actually make things happen, and they're making choices that you wouldn't necessarily make, but you can kind of see why they're making those choices. That's always fun.
Yeah. And Tony's wondering if you have any hobbies, and if so, are they likely to be featuring in any of your future novels?
I mean, I love walking, and that definitely featured in my latest novel, The Newcomer. My character walks a lot. I recently learned to drive. I got my license about a month ago, so I think driving will be making more of an appearance in my work, just as I kind of get familiar with it, then I can like introduce it into my work. Other than that, yeah, not really. You know, I'm just traveling, but I can't do that at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. And how have you found writing during all the lockdowns and that we've been having?
Well, last year I kind of gave myself permission not to write too much, even before lockdown began, because I finished The Newcomer at the end of 2019. And between The Newcomer and Beautiful Revolutionary, I had like a year and a half where I didn't write. And I felt really bad about not writing every day because I had been used to, you know, sitting at my desk and working on this long novel every day. But I actually, I found that I actually kind of needed that break and that period of not working on anything and just sort of consuming other people's work and, you know, reading and maybe taking some notes, but not necessarily working on something directly. So I gave myself permission not to write last year, and this year I've sort of slowly eased myself back into it. I am writing, but it's definitely, I guess, a bit slower than it used to be. I think lockdown and sort of not being as engaged with people, it definitely slows things down. But I do feel lucky to be working on stuff because it is a good distraction.
Yeah. And how have you found promoting your book when you haven't been able to go places?
Yeah, it's been hard. You know, there's been a few event cancellations and stuff like that. I think we were all somewhat prepared for it, and I was lucky enough to get a book launch in July. I sort of snuck that launch in between lockdowns, and it was good to have that. Yeah, I think to some extent you just have to be, you know, still willing to talk about it, but also not make that everything, because if you're too much involved in the promotion process, it can get to you, especially when things are cancelled.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, I've had like, I think people are reading it slowly, you know, however they're encountering it. It's yeah, unfortunately with bookshop closures and stuff, it's maybe
Yeah.
not reaching
That's
as many
harder.
people.
Yeah. And I just want to show your cover again for people. Whoops, if it's going to work for me. So I think it's a really great cover. And as soon as I saw it, I'd read the back and saw that it was about an island and that. And as soon as I saw it, I thought of Norfolk Island with the
Yeah.
trees and everything. Yeah. So did you have any input in the cover?
Yeah, we had about, I think, 4 different covers that I saw, and the first one I liked, but I thought, you know, it's not quite right yet, and it went through a few different versions, which were they all involved like the tree design somehow, but there was actually one that I said yes to, and then my publisher was like, no, I think it still needs some work, and they came back with this one, which I actually liked a lot better. I think it's, yeah, I like the color contrast with the bright blue and the orange font. I think it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it
So
turned
it's
out
a
good.
shame
Yeah.
that a lot of people can't go to bookshops and see, because especially if they haven't heard of you before, that see
Yeah.
the cover, and a lot of people just pick up books from a great cover and that as well. So it's a
Mm.
shame that people aren't seeing that in the bookshops.
Mm.
I'm wondering as well what you think about reviews. Do you read your reviews?
Yeah, I do read like the official reviews when they come
Mm,
out. I've been lucky this time around, like they've all been pretty positive. I think sometimes you get a positive review, but it still feels like the author of the review maybe didn't get the book, and you just
mm,
have to be like, okay, different people have different ratings of things, and not every person's gonna like interpret things the way I want them to, and you just have to be okay with that.
mm.
I try not to look at Goodreads. You know, that just feels a bit like, yeah, you don't want to engage with that sometimes. And yeah, you know, like I think you just have to, you know, if you're willing to look at them, by all means do it. But if you know it's just going to make you stress out and anxious,
Yeah.
maybe just avoid it. Yeah.
Mm. And have you got any tips for young writers out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really just have to write the book you want to read and be able to keep yourself entertained while you're working on it. Because if you don't like what you're writing, then it's probably not going to translate to the reader. I think don't try to think too much about what other people want to read. Just think about what you want to read, and hopefully that comes through. Because if you're passionate about the subject and about the characters, then I think that's the most important thing.
And are you someone who likes sharing your work as you go along, or do you just wait till the end when it goes to your editor?
Yeah, I don't share too widely. While writing The Newcomer, I had a writers group, which I don't have at the moment. We've all kind of gotten a bit slack and with lockdowns and everything, just not as in touch as we used to be. But I was especially sending my work to another crime writer, Anna Snokstra, who's a good friend of mine, and I think she's a brilliant writer. And this being my first, attempt at a crime novel, it was really great having her looking at it, and her comments were really helpful. But nobody saw the book in full until my editor saw it. I was sending friends chapters here and there, but my editor was the first person to read it. My editor and my agent were the first people to read it, like cover to cover.
And Tony said, you mentioned before, like about Goodreads and that. She said she only knows about Goodreads where readers can leave reviews. Is there anywhere else that where readers can leave reviews? Well, I know like Amazon you can.
Amazon, like online bookstores, Booktopia, I think, has reviews.
Yeah, Booktopia do,
Yeah.
And probably Book Depository and places like that as well.
But I'm not a member of Goodreads at the moment. I use a website called Storygraph, but I don't really go on it for reviews. It's more just to keep track of my reading and
okay, so they can that does similar to Goodreads, does it? Yeah. And Sharon said about your books, are they all the same genre? I think maybe we spoke about that a little bit before. So your other one was historical fiction, and the short story that you wrote before, were they a sort of theme or?
Yeah, well, the common theme to all my books is that I've been somewhat inspired by true crimes. So my short stories, The Love of a Bad Man, they're all about women who've been in relationships with bad men from history.
Oh, okay.
So, mostly set in the 20th century, and I've got Eva Braun, who's Hitler's mistress. I've got Charles Manson and the Manson girls and stuff like that. Some quite famous cases, but also some more obscure ones. So I guess that's a little bit crime, a little bit historical. Beautiful Revolutionary, the same. It's historical, but it's got that crime element to it. But it's not so much. With The Newcomer, I think it's more of a whodunit in the sense that we don't know who the killer is at the outset.
And I liked in The Newcomer how it sort of went, one chapter was like the current time, and then the next chapter was the past, and that I really enjoyed that in your book. Is that common, and like have you written like that before, or?
No, I hadn't written like that before. My previous novel was all sort of chronological. It did have some flashbacks here and there, but with this, it was very much switching between these two timelines. And when I was writing it, for the most part, I was switching between those stories just to sort of make it interesting for myself, but also kind of follow it as it was happening. But I did have some times where I would just get really into Paulina's story and just keep going with it and write a few of her chapters at once.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering if you did, and then mix them together at the end, or So do you feel that one's a bit easier than one way of doing it's easier than the other, or?
Um, it's hard to say because, yeah, the structure of this one, in some ways it was more complex because it did have these two timelines, but it ended up like, it just felt, I guess, intuitively like knew where I wanted to go, so that made it easier. But yeah, I think if I was plotting it from the outset, you know, every chapter at a time, that would have made it a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
So you have to follow the story where it's going to some extent.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been great chatting to you.
Thank you.
So, and I look forward to hearing more about new books coming out for you.
Yeah. Hopefully it won't be too long until the next one.
And thanks so much for everyone who joined in, and we had some great questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.